Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar looking at science and technology demonstrations launching on board Northrop Grumman's 20th Commercial Resupply Services mission to the International Space Station. I'm Patrick O'Neill, Public Affairs and Outreach Lead for the International Space Station National Laboratory, and I'll be your monitor for today's event. Okay, so let's talk about logistics for this launch. First and foremost, so as mentioned, this will be Northrop Grumman's 20th Commercial Resupply Services mission to the orbiting laboratory, contracted by NASA. The launch is slated to take place from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, no earlier than 12:29 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, January 29th. Northrop Grumman's Cygnus spacecraft will be filled with more than 8,200 pounds of critical research and supplies and will launch on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket with an expected rendezvous with the space station on Wednesday, January 31st. All right, speaking of research, that's why we're here today, as we have an impressive lineup of investigative teams launching payloads as part of this mission. These representatives will provide an overview of their project and answer questions to media who have registered in advance. For the general public following this live and wishing to ask a question of research teams speaking today, I encourage you to do so via hashtag ISS National Lab. But before we hear from teams launching investigations on NG-20, we will first hear from a few representatives from the ISS National Lab, NASA's ISS program, and NASA's Biological and Physical Sciences Division. For media, after these remarks, I will open to any questions you might have. To ask a question, please use the raise your hand feature in the Zoom platform, and we will unmute your line so that you may ask your question. Similar to the public, to ask a question, please use hashtag ISS National Lab. All right, I think that puts us in a pretty good place as far as logistics are concerned. So how about we start talking about some science? To kickstart everything, Dr. Michael Roberts, I would like to invite you to maybe say a few remarks on behalf of the ISS National Laboratory.
Thank you, Patrick. And depending on your time zone, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be with you today to hear from the teams who are launching new research to the International Space Station and the National Laboratory on NG-20. While this is the first Commercial Resupply Services mission of 2024, it has already been a year filled with eventful science going up to the International Space Station. As many of you know, Axiom Space, in coordination with SpaceX earlier this month, just over a week ago, launched 4 private astronauts from Europe to the space station as part of a 2-week mission. So science is ongoing, and this new science will find its place among the existing research payloads on board the International Space Station. The International Space Station National Lab team is proud to sponsor many of these projects that the crew have been working on during the X-3 mission, and we look forward to their safe return and the knowledge gained from their investigations. More importantly, speaking about Northrop Grumman's 20th Commercial Resupply Services mission launching on Monday, the ISS National Lab is proud to be sponsoring more than 20 payloads that range in disciplines of various areas of science. Some of these projects will be represented today on this webinar, and I hope that you find time to dive into not only what you learned today, but actually explore some of the other payloads whose teams are not represented here today. As with previous CRS launches of the Cygnus and Dragon vehicles, this mission showcases the diversity of experiments possible in space on the International Space Station, and how the knowledge gained from them at the edge of space benefits each of us here on Earth. There are life science investigations funded through scientific funding entities like the National Science Foundation that are focused on improving our fundamental understanding of physical processes, as well as multiple technology demonstrations that have near-term applications for industry, manufacturing, and medicine. Payloads looking at in-space production applications include optical fibers. How can we use space to create better, more effective products for consumers here on Earth? And much more. I encourage each of you to look at not only the mission overview we're speaking about today, but also visit the ISS National Lab website at issnationallab.org to learn more about these and other projects. So again, very excited to join the team here today and hear from the researchers about the exciting new projects in science that they are supporting on this mission. Patrick?
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Obviously, I'm very biased by working with the ISS National Lab, but I can certainly attest that there are a lot of fantastic investigations on this mission that we are fortunate enough to sponsor. And yes, as you mentioned, to learn more about some of those projects that might not be highlighted today during this webinar, please visit issnationallab.org to learn more. Next up, I would like to welcome Dr. Megan Everett, Deputy Scientist for NASA's International Space Station Program, to provide a perspective on our nation's space agency.
Thank you, Patrick. Great opportunity to be here to talk about our NASA science. So as Patrick already said, we're flying with 13 kilograms of upmass, supporting 46 different investigations and facilities on the International Space Station. We have researchers from all over the world conducting this great, innovative, and technically excellent research. All of this will go towards achieving NASA's goals of extending human presence in low Earth orbit and those exploration missions beyond low Earth orbit to places like the moon and out to Mars one day. We also want to benefit humans here on Earth with space-based science. So we really get to see how science in space is beneficial for humans on Earth. The goals that we want to achieve in NASA are going to be achieved through research areas in things such as human research, technology demonstrations, fundamental science, who you'll hear from Lisa about next, and some of our Earth-based observations. On this flight, we have investigators from our NASA sponsors, from our international partners, from the Japanese Space Agency and the European Space Agency, as well as the ISS National Labs. So today I'm just going to highlight a few of these investigations. As Mike said, and as Patrick said, there are a lot of investigations that we fully encourage you to go out and look at and learn more about, so you know more about the science that we're doing in space. The few that we're going to highlight today, we have a 3D metal printer investigation that was developed by the European Space Agency. And here we'll be 3D printing small metal pieces using steel, and then returning those to Earth to look at some of the structural differences between printing things in space and printing these on Earth. And the reason we're doing this is because when we talk about having vehicles in space for longer periods of time without being able to bring supplies up and down, we need to be able to print some of these smaller parts in space to help the integrity of the vehicle over time. Another investigation brought to us by NASA investigators is a robotic surgery tech demo. So here we'll be looking at the ability to perform surgery in space that is controlled from doctors on the ground. And don't worry, we're not doing surgery quite yet on the astronauts in space. We'll be using rubber bands to mimic human tissue. And we can test things like communication delay and see how well we can perform these small procedures in space. This has huge benefits for Earth as well in remote areas or hard to reach areas where we don't have a lot of medical practice. So hopefully these results are very translatable to space and to Earth. And the last specific investigation I'm going to talk about is called MYSTIC, and this is a National Labs investigation. It's called Manufacturing of Semiconductors and Thin Filaments in Space. So this is just one investigation from National Labs. You'll hear from some of the other investigators to talk about some other areas of their great science coming up. But specific to this one, we're looking at 3D printing semiconductors or other crystal structures in space, and to look at the structural integrity of the pieces printed in space versus those on Earth. And there has been some preliminary data to suggest that we can actually produce better products in space compared to Earth, which would directly translate to better electronics and energy producing capabilities. So this would be a huge benefit to be able to print these products in space and return them to Earth for use. And then lastly, in addition to these specific investigations, the Northrop Grumman vehicle will deliver resupply for ongoing human research that the crew already on orbit are participating in. So we are very excited about this mission and can't wait to see the results from the great science that we're flying. So with that, I will hand it back over to Patrick.
All righty. Thank you very much, Dr. Everett. Next, we will have Dr. Lisa Carnell, the Director of NASA's Biological and Physical Sciences Division, to discuss this launch.
Hi, thank you, Patrick, and thank you for the invitation to join you today. I'm really excited about the BPS research that we have flying on board NG-20. So just a quick overview of who BPS is for those who aren't aware, as Patrick mentioned. So I'm the director of the Biological and Physical Sciences Division at NASA under the Science Mission Directorate. And those who don't know our division, we use the spaceflight environment, taking full advantage of the International Space Station to study biological and physical systems. That includes plant, animal biology, quantum science, combustion, fluids, material science, and soft matter. And we have an incredibly diverse portfolio and touch on so many areas, much like Mike was talking about for ISS National Lab. We look at how those extreme conditions in space, such as different gravities, radiation levels, and atmospheres affect different phenomena. And this empowers us to pioneer scientific discovery and enable space exploration. And ultimately, those discoveries can benefit life on Earth. So including funding academic research and fueling the commercial space economy, the ISS National Lab has so many benefits that it's attributing to our nation. And it creates a universe of new possibilities for the next generation of scientists and engineers. So just to tell you a little bit about the experiments that we have on NG-20, we have 3 major experiments that we're flying on this go around. One is called, nicknamed, we affectionately nickname all of our experiments, Mabel A, and that is looking at the role of mesenchymal stem cells, so bone marrow stromal cells, and the effect of microgravity-induced bone loss. And so this could help provide better understanding of the basic molecular mechanisms of bone loss that are caused by spaceflight and potentially normal aging on Earth. Our second experiment that we've nicknamed Apex 10 is looking at the plant microbe interactions in space. And that can support steps to optimize the beneficial interactions between that plant microbe environment and increase plant productivity on Earth as well as in space. Our third experiment we've named BRIC 25. Biological research in canisters is what that stands for. And that can safeguard astronauts from health by looking at the bacterial adaptations and biofilm formation. So we're really excited about this science and look forward to those results as they are returned to Earth. We're excited also, just a little heads up, you're going to be hearing from our Mabel A PI, Dr. Abba Zubair, later on in this webinar. So just to touch on a look ahead for BPS in 2024, we are working on our decadal survey that highlights all the science that we should be focusing on over the next decade. And we will be rolling out some initial responses to that the first week of March during Space Week. And we will continue doing research aboard the space station using that and other ground-based platforms. And we look forward to talking more in the future about ISS commercial LEO destinations and how those will benefit you and the LEO economy as we do that transition. We also are really excited to highlight once again the synergies between National Lab and our program and the ISS program, all 3 of us that are here today. We are aligned to work on igniting innovation, a cancer moonshot, and we are building on that sort of research and development using this incredible platform and working to benefit life here on Earth and in space. So with that, I will hand it back over to you, Patrick.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for the words, kind words. At this point, I would throw out, if there are any questions again from members of the media, please feel free to use the raise your hand icon and we'll give it a quick second. And if not, then we will jump right on in to the presenters themselves. All right, well, then moving right along. Perfect. Okay, so first and foremost, our first researcher of the day, I would like to introduce Shane Ferrator, who is the co-founder and chief scientific officer for Virtual Incision Corporation. Shane will discuss NASA's robotic surgery tech demo, which will test technologies for performing robotic surgery in microgravity using a miniature surgical robot that can be remotely controlled or teleoperated from Earth. Shane, please tell us a little bit more about this project.
Thank you, Patrick. Can you hear me okay?
We got you
Yep.
loud and clear.
Fantastic. I'm also a faculty member at the University of Nebraska, and we've been doing research for many years doing making robots for surgery. So there's several robots out there in the world that perform surgery, but they're all very, very large. They're 9 feet tall and they weigh a couple thousand pounds. So rather than making big robots that are on the outside of the patient and reach in, we actually build small robots that go inside the patient. And through virtual incision, we're trying to commercialize those. Throughout our research, we were sponsored by both the Army and by NASA because both groups want to do surgery in crazy places. And our small robots kind of lend themselves to mobility like that. So I grabbed one. I don't know if you can see it, but I grabbed one of our little devices. But it weighs about 2 pounds and it's about as long as your forearm. And it has 2 arms, a left arm with a grasper and a right arm with a pair of scissors. And we made the device so it will fit inside a express rack locker. And we're going to dissect some simulated surgical tissue. First, the robot will go through some pre-programmed motions to perform this task. And then the more advanced part of our experiment will control the device from here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and dissect simulated surgical tissue on orbit. So that would be a big step forward for us, should be very exciting. We think this has lots of applications, both as NASA tries to do more aggressive missions, they're gonna think about more advanced medical care, but certainly here on Earth, if you have a specialist who's a very good surgeon and that specialist could dial into different locations and help with telesurgery or remote surgery like that, it has big applications to get people higher quality care. And that's important for rural areas or critical access hospitals where more advanced techniques may not be available. So we think we have really, really strong sort of terrestrial benefits to this. Our vision and our goal is to make every operating room robot ready and robot accessible. So only about 10% of operating rooms today are robotic, but we don't see any reason that shouldn't be 100%. So very excited about this flight and very excited to be on this mission.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. Quick question on my end actually is, can you talk a little bit more about how it was that your team, came to find out about being able to leverage the space station in the first place? And was this something that was, even top of mind to you, that you would have the chance to be able to send something to space?
Well, it's a bit of a dream come true, I guess. It's very nice to fly hardware. It's a big milestone, and it really is a delivery. It's kind of a stake in the ground. But as I mentioned before, we were always focused on this telesurgery component and doing surgery in remote forward environments. And this is one of the most forward and most remote environments I can think of. So fingers crossed, we're very excited.
And should this go according to plan and that there is some success with this, are there future visions of trying to do additional R&D either through NASA, the space station, or just space in general?
Absolutely. I think, again, this is a technology demonstration. We want to show what's possible, but we also want to move this forward, both on Earth and for, again, long duration space flight and more aggressive space missions.
Perfect. Well, looking forward to obviously a successful launch and hopefully a successful tech demonstration on top of that. Shane, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome. So next, we're going to introduce Mark Fernandez, who is the principal investigator of Spaceborne Computer 2 at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. He will discuss the company's continued development of its commercial, off-the-shelf, high-performance computer system that can operate in the harsh conditions of space. Mark, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, Patrick. Again, I'm Mark Fernandez. I'm HPE's computer scientist for Space Solutions and Services, and I'm the PI for the ISS National Lab Spaceborne Computer. I'm fortunate enough to have been helping the space and science community since the beginning of spaceborne, and I'm really excited and looking forward to getting back on board to continue to show the value of artificial intelligence and machine learning and edge computing in space to a greater audience. I submitted a slide. I don't know if it's visible to folks, but oh, maybe it's coming up now. All right. So in the upper left is Spaceborne Computer installed on the International Space Station. We're really there to help scientists accelerate their work and their discoveries. And I'm going to cover a little bit about what we've already done scientifically, which kind of gives you some hints about what we plan to do on our next mission. One example of which we're very proud and for which we won a prestigious NASA award is shown in the lower left with those white framed images. Astronauts go on a spacewalk, and after their workday, the gloves are examined for wear and tear. And this must be done by every astronaut after every spacewalk before the gloves can be used again. To do this examination, you take a lot of high-res photographs, as you can see right there. Those photographs are sent to Earth for analysis, and this takes about 5 days. Well, in collaboration with NASA and Microsoft, we developed in the cloud an AI model that was deployed to Spaceborne Computer at the edge of the edge. This model does the analysis, and it can identify and flag those worn areas of concern, as you see in the process photos. The analysis in space on Spaceborne Computer took 45 seconds. So we're kind of going from 5 days to just a few minutes. In a totally different scientific field, shown in the upper right is DNA analysis. There's an actual physical DNA sequencer on the board, on board the ISS. And the output of the DNA sequencer is a lot of DNA data. And that data can take up to a month to download to Earth. But you're really only interested in if anything's wrong, a small mutation in the DNA, etc. So hopefully there's nothing there. And if it is, it's a small mutation. Well, with Spaceborne Computer, we did the DNA analysis in about 12 minutes. So we've taken that processing from months to minutes. So these are just a couple examples of what we've done and the type of science that we can accelerate over our upcoming mission. With this spectrum of science that we can address, regardless of your field of endeavor, I can compute faster than you can download. And Spaceborne Computer with the ISS National Lab is the greatest opportunity for your partners and others to explore the value of edge computing. And we look forward to expanding this in the other scientific fields that we're going to help out with on our upcoming mission. So thank you very much, Patrick. Back to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mark. You touched a little bit on this, but one of the things that I've always loved about this project is the number of partners that are involved. I mean, in the past, and you mentioned Microsoft, but IBM, Red Hat. On this mission, I believe that you have an international partner in Kioxia. Not always companies that you would expect to kind of operate in the same box together. But maybe can you talk a little bit about how space seems to have the ability to bring companies and people together for a common good?
Well, first off, it's cool, right? And this is a very reasonably priced opportunity to do something in space and to go present to your program managers that you want to do something in space. And oh, by the way, I've got this path through the ISS National Lab and HPE Spaceborne Computer that we can do some really cool stuff. That's kind of bringing folks in, like you say, international, higher education, Code Wars we participated in, and various national and international laboratories. So we are like Switzerland. We treat all approaching scientists equally, and we love to see the light bulbs go off when we accelerate their research from months to minutes or from 5 days to 45 seconds.
Fantastic. And again, it's been a joy to work with your team over the last couple of iterations of this, and can't wait to see what happens next with Spaceborne Computer 2.
Thank you.
All righty. So now I'm going to move on to Mary Murphy. Mary is the Director of Programs at NanoRacks, and she will discuss GAITI. There we go. Let's see if I got that right. Extravehicular Robotics Demonstration, which aims to showcase the versatility and dexterity of GAIT's robotic system in microgravity. So first and foremost, Mary, did I remotely get that correct with the pronunciation?
I believe it's Gitai, but we're, close enough. So hopefully that'll not offend anyone. It's a little bit of a tongue twister if you're not from a certain origin. So we're very excited to be here today. So first of all, thank you everyone for listening to us here and dialing in. I know there's a lot of exciting research on this mission, especially. Gitai actually has been working with NanoRacks for a couple of missions now. This is actually our second large mission that we're doing utilizing our Bishop airlock. The first one was called was S2 actually, which was their initial robotic arm demonstration, which was actually held within the pressurized volume of Bishop on the ISS. With this new investigation, as Patrick mentioned, GHOST, which is Gitai S2's extravehicular multi-objective in-space servicing task demonstration, which I almost got through without messing up, which is quite a tongue twister as well, is a very exciting opportunity where we're actually taking the work that they did on their first mission, further innovating that, and now actually conducting this 2-meter class modular robotic arm demonstration outside of the Bishop airlock in the unpressurized volume outside of ISS. So this will be a very exciting next step in this capability to actually have the ability to do robotic manipulation of objects in that environment. I think they're showing you now, hopefully, a picture here, which we're a little bit rotated there on, but hopefully gives you a good perspective. I guess when we're up in space, it won't matter really what direction it's in anyhow. So it's, it gives you kind of, I guess, a good idea of what it'll look like when we're up there. But you can see in this image, the 2 robotic arms here. So these are both what Gitai refers to as their S2 class, which is a 2-meter class modular robotic arm. And within those 2 robotic arms, you'll see a couple of little tool changers there on the front. Those are able to manipulate and grab different tools, interact with a task board, so we can get really good representation of different types of activities that these robotic arms can perform in various environments, especially harsh environments, potentially disaster relief, deep sea excavation, nuclear, any kind of other harsh environment that we are able to see as an analog within that ISS external environment. We're also excited to hear some efforts that they're looking at procuring and doing some more work in the lunar environment as well. So this is really that next generation building on that first mission. So it's been very exciting to work with them as they've continued to develop their technology. And we're excited to host them once again on the Bishop airlock on ISS. So thank you so much, Patrick, and let me know if there's any questions.
Indeed. Once again, if media is in attendance that does want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand. One thing I would say, and I hope that everyone else was able to go out there and crook their necks simultaneously with me, so that way we're all needing to stretch out after this is done. But I don't want to put you on the spot, but the NanoRacks team, obviously there's a variety of facilities that you have on station. I don't know if there are any other projects that are flying on this mission that would be of interest for you to touch on, or things that you can be focused on in the future launches that you might want to speak on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting one because I think, as you know, we've had a lot of history working together with national labs and with NASA on ISS especially. And there's been a lot of exciting science, over the years on this particular mission. We have a few other investigations that are also flying. One of them is actually looking to study arthritis inflammation, which is actually kind of cool. So that's utilizing our NanoLab platform on ISS as well. So that one's a bio payload that will be flying here as well. And the NG-20 team is currently in the lab getting ready for turnover on Sunday. So a lot's going on. And we also have a DreamUp payload that's also flying on this mission that's looking at electrical components and exposure and how those might be more useful for demonstrating how students can understand, different complex investigations that they might work with in the future for other work. So that's it as far as this particular mission, but we also had things on the AX3 mission, which Mike Roberts talked about earlier, and quite a few more coming up later this year. So we're very excited.
Awesome. And we did get a quick question from the hashtag ISS National Lab, kind of a general one, but what is the benefit of this type of technology? And I think that they're talking specifically about the arms itself. What kind of tasks can it carry out?
Yeah, so in the first one, when we did S1 inside of station, we were looking at some of the more kind of simple tasks that can be taken over to free up crew time. As we all know, the use of the crew and the human in the loop for, on-orbit work is very limited. So being able to do some of those more simple tasks is certainly something that a robotic assistant could help with. So we were looking at things like unplugging and plugging in an Ethernet connector, turning off and on power switches, unplugging, replugging, moving objects, etc. So that's the kind of stuff that we did with the first investigation. With this next investigation, again, we're kind of stepping up the complexity. Now we have a whole tool interchange where we're going to switch off which tools we're using. We'll be able to use, like screwdriver analogs and things like that will enable us to do even more work. And now we can look at even beyond just taking away something that the crew would have, to spend time working on. Now we also have the capacity to do additional work in harsher environments where we don't necessarily want to expose the crew to. So if we had something that we wanted to take care of outside of a habitat on the lunar station or something like that, or even something outside of ISS, we could again have this capability to have this robotic assistant do that work for us, or we could control and do that work instead using this hardware and this technology. So that's one of the areas of interest that we're looking at here.
Fantastic. That was a great overview, and looking forward to seeing you down in Florida in a couple of days for some smoke and fire.
We're excited. Thanks so much.
Of course. Next up, please welcome Nicole Wagner. She is the Chief Executive Officer of LAM Division, who will be launching its lucky number 9th investigation, I want to say, on this mission in pursuit of advancing efforts to manufacture artificial retinas in space. Nicole, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for inviting me today. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicole Wagner. I am the President and CEO of LAM Division, which is a University of Connecticut spinoff company that is developing a protein-based artificial retina to restore vision to the millions of patients that are blinded by end-stage retinal degenerative diseases. So these are diseases like macular degeneration, which many of you are probably familiar with, and retinitis pigmentosa. So both of these diseases are devastating diseases, which ultimately lead to blindness for the individual. Retinitis pigmentosa, it is an orphan disease. It affects about 100,000 people in the United States, about 1.5 million people globally. And this disease is the leading cause of heritable blindness. We will then move to the larger market of macular degeneration. This disease, it affects over 50 million people globally, about 10 million people in the United States, and it is the leading cause of blindness in people that are 55 and older. So I imagine that many of you are thinking to yourselves, why is artificial retina company going to space? And why are we doing research on the International Space Station? So the way that we manufacture our protein-based artificial retina is through a process called electrostatic layer-by-layer deposition. Now, this process consists of depositing multiple layers of our light-activated protein bacteria rhodopsin onto an ion-permeable scaffold. So think of this scaffold almost like a tightly woven piece of gauze. Now, this process on Earth is very much subject to the effects of gravity. So things like sedimentation, evaporation, convection, surface tension are all going to play a role in the way that the protein is deposited onto our scaffold. Now, because we are depositing multiple layers, over 200 to be exact, any imperfections that happen at a lower number of layers, let's say 50, get compounded by the time that we're at 200 layers, which ultimately for us leads to inefficient, irregular protein deposition, and ultimately that can impact our artificial retina performance. So to date, along with our implementation partner Space Tango, LAM Division has flown over 8 missions to the International Space Station since 2018 in order to examine the impact of microgravity on the layer-by-layer deposition process used to generate our artificial retinas. Now, these experiments have shown considerable progress and promise in using microgravity to generate more homogeneous thin films. Importantly, throughout these experiments, we have focused on improving the hardware, the automation, imaging capabilities, as well as in-orbit process controls that are used to monitor the manufacturing process. To date, we have generated over 10 artificial retina thin films that we've used now for analysis. So we're excited that our NG-20 mission, it represents our 9th mission to the International Space Station. Since we have refined our manufacturing process over the course of the past 8 missions, we're now looking at making this process scalable. So in this mission, we're looking at sending a powdered form of bacteria rhodopsin to the ISS that will then be resuspended into a solution. And we will be using special instruments, in this case, spectrometers, to look at the protein quality and purity on the International Space Station, as well as to validate this process used to get the protein into solution. These experiments and measurements will ultimately help us ensure that the implants that were generated are using high quality protein that are made from these raw materials in space. So we're excited. We're very excited about this mission on NG-20, and we're looking forward to the results from this flight as we continue to think about scaling both on the International Space Station and future commercial LEO destinations. So thank you very much.
And, question on my end. So again, this is going to be the 9th time that you're flying an investigation of the space station. And you mentioned the fact that you were kind of a startup out of the University of Connecticut. So, again, when you think about it from that perspective, as a startup, would you ever consider the ability to send research or investigations to the space station, 9 different times to build on, something that could eventually have profound impacts for people here on Earth?
Certainly, being on the space station has been, flying experiments at ISS has been very exciting for us. When we started back in 2016, which we were part of Mass Challenge at that time, it wasn't that we didn't imagine doing experiments on the ISS, but as a company that traditionally does experiments on Earth, we just didn't know how to get there. So fortunately, through that experience, we had the opportunity to be connected to our implementation partner. In this case, we work with Space Tango. They have really helped to facilitate miniaturizing our huge Earth-based apparatus into something that's about the size of a shoebox. So we actually fly in Space Tango's Cube Lab. So you can think about making multiple artificial retinas in something that's about the size of a shoebox. And, now having flown eight missions to the ISS, it really is, every time it's still a pinch me moment, still super exciting. We're really excited to be flying this 9th mission coming up.
Well, hopefully next time there'll be a 10th mission and you'll actually be down in Florida and we'll go and experience that together. So
that'll be exciting. Thanks a lot, Patrick.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. Greatly appreciate it. And so last, but certainly not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Abazubair, who is the medical director of the Mayo Clinic, who will discuss a NASA investigation aiming to use microgravity to cultivate clinical grade stem cells for therapeutic applications in humans.
Thank you, Patrick, for the invitation. I hope you can hear me.
We got you loud and clear.
Thank you. Thank you. This is pretty exciting, having the launch in sight, hopefully on Monday. My project involves the use or the understanding of how microgravity impact bone loss. As you all know, bone loss is a major issue for astronauts, specifically for long space flights, as well as it's a major problem on Earth here, especially women that are postmenopausal, they lose their bone density, or patients that are bedridden. It's a major problem for them because they also lose bone mass. So the goal here is to look at bone-forming stem cell, which are the mesenchymal stem cell, and see how gravity affects the ability of those stem cells to form bone or lose bone. So we will, the goal for this study is based on a previous space flight project that we did in 2017, where we culture expanded mesenchymal stem cell in addition to other types of stem cell, which at that time our mission was really to look at how to grow the stem cell for human application on Earth, specifically stroke, because stroke is something we worked on and using mesenchymal stem cell that are grown on Earth to treat patients on a clinical trial basis. So we wanted to see the cells grown in space would have an impact, and maybe we can grow more cells. But interestingly, we didn't see any expansion of the cells, however, compared to the Earth. However, we've seen that their functionality, their ability to cause anti-inflammation is more when they are expanded under microgravity condition. So clearly we get a notion that gravity does affect the physiology or the functionality of mesenchymal stem cell. And that led us to the thought maybe it does play a role directly in terms of bone formation or bone loss. So the goal of this project is to see how mesenchymal stem cell interact with other bone enabling cells like osteocytes and also osteoclasts that play a role in bone loss, to see what kind of communication. So we would evaluate cytokine and other growth factor release. We will also look at the genes that are involved in bone formation and how gravity affected them. We would also look at the interaction of the different cells. Finally, which would be in our second space flight in December, we would test out a compound, a novel compound that we believe would address the issue of the bone loss because it does affect IL-6 signaling pathway, which is something we think play a role in how gravity affects bone formation or bone loss. So that is in a nutshell our project. This is in partnership with the BioSab, which is our implementation partner that will provide the hardware that we need for this project.
Fantastic, Dr. Zubair. And, quick question on my end, because you mentioned that your team has flown projects in the past, but can you maybe talk a little bit about why it is that the Mayo Clinic sees the value in continuing to send projects to the International Space Station in low Earth orbit?
Well, Mayo Clinic, as you rightly know, is premier academic medical center that really focus on finding novel ways to address the unmet patient need. And one of these clearly is either stroke, which there is no real treatment other than management of the patient, or even understanding bone loss, especially after menopause, or patients that are bedridden. So Mayo continue to explore, to look for ways to address unmet patients' needs, and that's why we're a premier medical center.
And maybe can you also touch a little bit too on just the impact that microgravity has on stem cells? Like what is drastically different about evaluating stem cells in the absence of gravity versus doing it in your normal lab setting here on Earth?
Yes, so like just to highlight, in our first spaceflight experiment, we identify over 1,000 genes that are expressed differentially compared to the ground control cells that we grow. So clearly gravity has a significant impact. So absence of it does affect how genes express, and this affect multiple functionality, multiple pathways. So we wanted to understand this. Clearly, if we want to be multi-species planets, people, we would need to know how our physiology will change in a different planets with different gravity setting.
Perfect. And I think that we did get a question. I think it's from Mark Carreau. I can't read it in the chat, but maybe it's something that you can ask Dr. Zubair.
Is this in the chat? I can see question.
Oh, never mind. Disregard. I apologize. Actually, we'll get to that in just a second. So, okay, fantastic. Well, Dr. Zubair, again, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it, and best of luck with this upcoming mission. We'll see you down on at the Space Coast.
Thank you.
All right. So, what I would like to do is, prior to calling it a day, if you will, is if there are any questions that are popping up from members of the media. I see that there is a question from Sally Ward Foxton, and it is for Mark Fernandez. So Sally was asking, the previous setup, why did it take so long for analysis or glove photos? It seems extreme. Is this related to communications delay? Is the system in the ISS made of standard HPE products, or what changes were made? And what are the biggest challenges for the spaceborne computer? How does microgravity affect the computer and about radiation? So there's a lot of questions in here for you to jump on, but maybe focus a little bit more on some of the challenges that your team has faced, especially given the fact that you have flown spaceborne a couple of times in the past. What was learned, and ultimately, how this one's going to be a little bit different.
Okay, well, like you said, a lot there, Patrick. So yes, the download from the space station to Earth is governed by lots of different factors, and it is primarily the speed and availability through the TDRS satellites, et cetera. So I just take the partner's word on how long it's been taking them to get stuff down, and then blow their minds with how fast I can do it in space and give them just that tiny bit of insight of that tiny mutation or that tiny little JPEG with their annotated results on it. So I want to hand out kudos to ISS designers, etc. One of the things that we exploit is water cooling. We're allowed to access what's called the medium temperature loop, and spaceborne computer generates a good bit of heat. And instead of putting that out on the air into the cabin space, we put it into the medium temperature loop, much as we do in data centers down here. And it has been absolutely flawless. So if any partners or experimenters out there are considering difficulties in cooling their experiments, consider tapping into the medium temperature loop. It's been absolutely rock solid. So is that enough, Patrick, or you want me to expand some more?
I mean, I think that's enough to be dangerous right there. So, but again, I think that's the beauty of having these types of technological demonstrations in the first place, is that there's always going to be things that you learn, and there's things that you can build upon. And again, that's why we're having SBC2 fly on this mission, is to build on the knowledge that's been gained in the past.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see that we also have a question for Shane. This is from Gene. Will there be a control experiment going on the ground at the same time that you are operating in space? And what will be the next steps after the experiment is concluded?
No, there won't be a control experiment. We are developing the technology for Earth-based applications, and we're certainly doing remote surgery across town, across the country, here in the US. But again, that's being developed for terrestrial applications. There's no parallel experiment similar to what we're going to do on the ISS. But we have big plans. We want to make this technology available in every hospital in the US, and we think it could have major implications in the developing world and internationally. So lots to do. Virtual Incision is seeking FDA approval for not Space Mirror, but the platform itself. So exciting things will be happening in 2024.
Fantastic. Thank you, Shane. I see that Jeff Faust has his hand raised. Jeff, feel free to ask away.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Jeff Faust of Space News. Two questions. One for Mark. Just maybe you could summarize what's new and improved with the computer you're flying on this flight. And then for Nicole, since this is your 9th flight, I'm curious your perspective on how the work with the ISS National Lab and the ISS itself has evolved over that time. What have you learned over that process to make the flying the experiments easier to do?
All right, so Mark Fernandez here. Very good questions. Yes, this is a quote-unquote upgraded Spaceborne Computer 2. It's got a new operating system, new security patches. Everything's been brought up to modern standards now. It was installed and rocked and rolled starting in 2018, so we're a few years behind. One of the things we're super excited about is our partner Kioxia is working with us, and we'll be sending up 30 terabyte SSDs. And when I talk to folks, that's 30 million megabytes. And that alone sounds like quite a bit, but I've got 4 of them on board. So We will be able to store any and all of your raw data that you generate up there and process it and get your insights back down to Earth faster and better than ever done before.
Thanks, Mark. So this is Nicole Wagner here. Thanks, Jeff, for your question. You know, as a follow-up and having now 9 flights, this will be our 9th flight going to the ISS. I mean, I think certainly through the first 8 flights, we have done a lot to mature and advance the hardware that's been used on board to generate the artificial retina thin films. And of course, this has been done with Space Tango. In addition to the maturation of the hardware, we've also improved some of the process controls, the imaging of the actual artificial retina itself. So we get a lot of feedback on the ground in order to give us, you know, real-time optimization. And then I think the other really big part of this is that through these multiple flights, we've also been able to do this with really good automation. So in the very early flights, you know, we had to go in and make modifications in real time. Now these have been running almost completely autonomously. So that has really helped in terms of streamlining this overall process. I think, you know, certainly in the past couple of flights, what we've been looking at is scale. So how do we take everything that we've learned to date and build on that so that we can generate more artificial retinas in low Earth orbit? Things like thinking, how can we make things a little bit smaller? How do we get more cameras in there? How do we, you know, reduce some of the mass that we're using to fly these artificial retina thin films? Ultimately, just to continue to generate a really high quality product as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for the question, Jeff, as well. We got one from the hashtag, and it's for Dr. Everett or Dr. Roberts, I believe. The experiments shared today seem to show or seem to skew more towards being autonomous. In general, are more experiments being flown autonomous in nature, or are they requiring just as much crew time as experiments did, say, 5 years ago? Good question.
I can start. This is Meg, so I can start with an answer for that, and I'll let Mike tack on to anything that I don't cover. So I'll say that the technology advances that we see on Earth are also translating to technology advances that we see in space. So we are able to do things more autonomously, which actually helps the science and the reproducibility of the science. But at this point, it is also very important that we have crew participating in these experiments. And most of them we cannot do completely autonomously in space. Our crew members on the ground do a lot of training before they fly to support the science. And then we have a lot of procedures that are written so that the crew can do the science in space, following the procedures and following with ground support help. We're even doing some things where you can use VR to help out with the procedures. With that said, one of the things we really want to do in the future is to improve the ability to do more autonomous science in space. So we are always looking at advances in technology that will allow that, and looking at things that are a little bit out of the box and scoping things a little bit differently than we are now. So we're really hoping to start doing more of that emerging science and really tackle that efforts going forward into the future of space flight on low Earth orbit and beyond low Earth orbit, well, where we will have to do things more autonomously. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mike.
I agree with everything Meg said. She answered it very well. I would add to that, there are experiments which are more amenable to automation than others, and where we have matured over the past 25 years or so, I would say, with great strides, is identifying more earlier in the test and development phase where automation is beneficial. So certainly as we move into increasing replicability of experiments so that we are able to have higher throughput, leading us to, one day perhaps performing clinical trials in low Earth orbit. Certainly in the manufacturing realm, where you have repetitive processes that are typically require precise quality control through all steps, and you need those repeated through multiple cycles, automation is going to be a far more beneficial approach than having a human exercise each of those steps. So what we've been doing, certainly with the access to crew on the International Space Station, is refine those processes for both research, technology development, and now moving into the manufacturing realm, so that we understand where automation is the desired endpoint. In some cases, as Meg pointed out, it's very important still to have humans in the loop. Where you need to iterate and improve on the outcomes from your experiment, we have new tools such as edge computing that is flying as well. You heard from HPE on that topic today. So we're improving not only our understanding and not gaining knowledge by access to low Earth orbit, we're improving the ways by which we gain that knowledge and actually generate the data in real time. So all of this feeds into a future where there will be a need for some experiments, some manufacturing practices to have humans in the loop, and others where you need full automation, and having a human in the loop is actually going to limit productivity. And another example of that from the materials and semiconductor side is a lot of the manufacturing processes may generate intermediate products which are harmful in a crewed environment. So you would want to put those in automated platforms that are separated from the crew. So with the International Space Station and the support of all of the commercial service providers and implementation partners, we're refining our understanding of where it's appropriate to have humans in the loop and where it's more beneficial to the research outcomes and other goals to not have humans in that same environment.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Mike. Thank you, Dr. Meg. And Sophie Sanchez, by the way, thank you very much for the fantastic question. It looks like I have two more questions that have popped up, both from Jean McColka. The first one is for Mark Fernandez, and this is kind of a forward-looking one, I would say. One can see the need for a system like this for a long-term flight. Are you in discussions to fly the system a little further out? Could a smaller version of this perhaps fly on the Lunar Gateway?
The short answer is absolutely. There's hardly any scientific endeavor we do here or anywhere that doesn't require computers, and HPE Spaceborne Computer is leading the way. We're proven, and we plan to go the Gateway to the Moon and eventually to Mars. So yes, indeed. Thank you.
We look forward to that one too down the road. And then this one, it's geared towards Meg Everett, possibly, maybe another one where the two of you and Dr. Mike can piggyback on each other. On the materials experiments, you indicated metals are a little better when crafted in low Earth orbit. How so? Are they stronger, more pure? And how will that help you in space manufacturing or simply making repairs in a long-term lunar or Mars mission? Great question.
All right, I can start off with that, and then again, I'll hand it over to Mike to fill in the gaps. So what I will say is we really are on the cutting edge of figuring out how to do this 3D printing in space. And so right now we are printing things in space and returning them to Earth so that we can answer the exact question you just asked of what are the properties that are better in space versus Earth? And then how do we take those small filaments or those semiconductors and those crystal structures, and how do we make those into products such as electronics and really benefit from what we're producing in space? Those right now we can't answer your specific question with what piece is better, but what we can say is that we know the effects of gravity. Sometimes they cause disorganization in how fibers lay, and it creates sort of a chaos or unpredictability. So when we're in space, we can kind of lay those fibers on top of each other, lay those structures a little bit better, and we can create more predictable, uniform, stronger structures. And it's really that uniformity that we're looking for. And that's the area we're focusing on to hopefully make better in space, and then transmit what we learned to the ground and produce those end products.
And I've just add to that, yeah, there's two facets of that, at least two facets of that question. One is, yes, there are, we have been able to demonstrate through some experimentation that there are benefits to the materials that can be manufactured in the space environment, including those from metal powders. Anytime that you have a process where you're mixing liquids or solids and they have different densities, you can, at some point in most deposition processes, we talked about thin layer deposition with Dr. Wagner's research for Lab Division. Buoyancy driven convection can have a negative impact on that, and you remove that with the absence of gravity. The other aspect of it is, in some cases with 3D printing of metal structures, it's going to be more efficient from both a resource perspective and a reliability perspective to assemble in orbit or manufacture in orbit. So in some cases, you make hardened components, which you then have to pack into the nose of a rocket and take up into space or to your final destination to use it. In some cases, it may be advantageous to actually build those in the working environment where you're finally going to use them in space. So we're looking at that, at several levels, both the improvement in the materials themselves that then become part of components, and then the actual manufacture of the components themselves.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Meg. That was great answers, and again, fantastic questions too. And I think that that's a great way for us to wrap things up for today's webinar. So again, thank you to all those who joined us, both from a media perspective as well as from the general public. And I obviously want to thank those that were associated from the panel's perspective. As mentioned, we are looking to have this launch, which is Northrop Grumman's 20th Commercial Resupply Services mission to the orbiting outpost, no earlier than 12:29 p.m. Eastern Time frame from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station here in Florida. For up-to-the-minute information, please follow at NASA or at NASA Kennedy via social platforms, or you can follow coverage, follow coverage if you from NASA's International Space Station blog. We hope you found today to be very informative. So with that, it's been a pleasure moderating today's webinar. On behalf of the ISS National Lab, I am Patrick O'Neill. Go Dragon, go Cygnus, and go Science. Thank you and have a great weekend.